On the eve of the US election, the leftist media are getting desperate. With only 2 days to go until the polling booths close for good, MSNBC, CNN, and programs like The View are throwing the kitchen sink at Donald Trump, attacking him and his supporters from all angles, in a last-ditch effort to get Kamala Harris over the line in those crucial swing states. Sky News All-Stars James Morrow, Mick Mulvaney, and Joe Siracusa take a look at the brutal media attacks on Donald Trump and ask if they're helping to push the dial towards Kamala Harris in the final days of the election campaign. There is no denying the momentum in the US election is with Donald Trump. From his packed-out rallies to social media takeovers, all eyes have been on Donald Trump. But the mainstream US media does not want you to know that. They've been working overtime to suggest Trump and his campaign are failing, says Sky News All-Star James Morrow.
There will be people who will be going up and, we're leaning one way who may slip the other way because I just don't know if I can stand this or that or the other thing. And I think Trump may be hurt by some of that with the real, and I mean, you don't know the level of media hysteria here. You see some of it reflected back, through the ABC and the Herald and all of those sorts of, operations that are just, in an absolute, lather about the idea that Trump could become president. And it's almost like they're telling Australians not to vote for him. But it's, here, the media frenzy is in an absolute full tilt. A couple of people we've spoken to just on the street already, just been in Raleigh a couple hours, I think people are pretty weary of it. Every radio station you hear, every TV that's playing, is just nothing but political ads, wall to wall. So I think people are really also looking for a bit of respite too.
Sky News All-Star Mick Mulvaney agrees, saying Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing.
Well, I wonder whether what's going to happen if the media dresses Trump up as the new Hitler. What will happen on the street should he win? Because, of course, the new Hitler is serious if it's true. Is he, in fact, the new Hitler, raging that he'd like to see even his opponents being executed, as we're told?
Yeah, I don't have too much concern about Donald Trump being the next Hitler. I worked with the man for 4 years. Listen, if I had seen anything like that, Andrew, I would have quit on the spot. Look, Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. There are people who just cannot deal with Donald Trump rationally, and they end up doing irrational things. This includes his former chief of staff, John Kelly, my predecessor, who came out over the course of the last several days and said that he heard Trump say nice things about Hitler. He considered Trump to be a fascist, a dictator in waiting, etc. I worked with John. I worked in the same White House. I called dozens of my former workers and said, "Did I just miss this? And did y'all hear this?" And no one ever told me, and they hadn't heard it either. Interestingly, there are a bunch of anti-Trump former administration officials who came out in support of those comments by John Kelly, but what they didn't say was that they heard the same things. They said it sounded about right, or they believed John. So look, it's a he said, she said at the very highest level. But the bottom line is, no, I don't think he's going. I'm not at all concerned about it being Hitler. I voted for him, by the way. If I thought it was Hitler, that wouldn't happen. But I think your point is well made, which is somebody's going to believe it. And if they really do believe it, what comes next? Will there be riots if he wins? Will be the additional assassination attempts if he wins? We can talk about the chances of violence if he loses, but there's also, a non-zero chance of violence if he wins for some of the reasons you've just pointed out.
Polling has been flowing through thick and fast, and whilst it's very tight, many of the top pollsters seem to be backing a Trump victory, says Sky News All-Star Joe Siracusa.
You'll expect Donald Trump to win, even though the polls are showing it's pretty tight at the moment. And Iowa is an interesting one, showing that it's kind of flipped there in favour of Kamala Harris. Is that because of the electoral vote? What's your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of polls. I mean, yeah, I think these polls are very suspicious. Towards the end of a campaign, Kenny, the polls aren't really polls. They're really kind of thinly veiled propaganda. They don't telling people that they'd be the last person. They don't want to be the last person not voting for the right person. So a lot of the polls are quite unreliable. That poll in in the Des Moines Register, and I know it pretty well, Silverstein's late, and Silverstein, and that particular poll is Democratic driven, and you know, Mark Twain used to say, "Tell me where you get your corn pones, and I'll tell you what you're thinking." So, you know, they're trying to make things happen that aren't going to happen. I saw in the New York Post last night that they have one poll that shows that Trump is going to win all 7 battleground states. His numbers are rising there, and that the Democrats will lose control of the Senate. So, you know, pick a poll. But yeah. I think the odds are against Kamala Harris. I mean, she's run a good race as far as she could, but she came in too late. You know, the Democrats are going to say, well, it's all Joe Biden's fault. He didn't leave quick enough. Well, I don't know where it says in the Constitution the sitting president has to leave because a bunch of people want to spill the guy. And that happens in Australia and in the parliamentary system. But, you know, she took his nomination off him, and she's never recovered. That is, she never had a chance to explain to the American people why she should be president of the United States.
And the latest polling has freaked out the mainstream media, leading MSNBC's Joe Scarborough to bizarrely attack Trump voters.
Who are these people? Where are they coming from? And who raised them? And how did Donald Trump twist their point of view so much in 9 years that the brutalization of an 83-year-old man is something to laugh about, or the shooting of press members is an applause line?
Yeah, laughs and cheers when Trump suggested the press should be shot. And my friend, the legendary photographer at the AP, Evan Vucci, who's traveling with the Trump campaign here, says that as each rally goes on, particularly last night in Georgia, the threats from the crowd to the press, they're there in the arena, only growing. They're really concerned there about the security situation.
And over on CNN, a reporter went to great lengths to paint a picture of a lackluster Trump rally.
The turnout today so far for this event is quite thin. There is a lot of empty seats left in this arena, and Donald Trump is now supposed to speak in the next hour here. So I'm not saying that's a sign about what we can expect in Pennsylvania by any stretch or in this county, but Donald Trump has built his brand around his ability to turn out large crowds. And so far in the stops today in North Carolina and here in Reading, it is noticeably thin here.
But commentators on X hit back, showing the reality of the rally, which was heaving. This commentator said, "Holy cow, look at this insanely massive crowd for rightful President Trump in Reading, Pennsylvania. This is Trump's second of 4 rallies today. Kamala wishes she had this much support. Pennsylvania is Trump country." CNN continued with their desperate attempt to bring down Trump, again calling him a fascist.
I also want to make a point that Democrats have been calling him a fascist and other names for a long time. There's plenty of blame to go around.
Republicans too.
Hold on a second.
A fascist is not a name. A fascist is a bunch of things that add up to a way of being.
Yeah,
they're calling him a fascist because he's behaving like a fascist.
I agree with that.
Because he's talking about poisoning the blood of the nation, and because he's talking about rounding up political enemies, and because he's acting like a demigod, and because he's saying the rules don't apply to me, and because he's saying I'm going to close up the free press, and I'm going to close your schools if you don't do what I say. He's acting like a fascist. That's why we're calling him a fascist. He's saying people are scum because he thinks they're scum, not because they are.
And then doubling down with more divisive rhetoric.
4 days out from Election Day, and former President Donald Trump is escalating his violent rhetoric, suggesting one of his most prominent critics, the former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, should be fired upon.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy.
Let's see how she feels when the guns are trained on her face. Let's sit with that for a moment.
And Whoopi Goldberg from The View topped it all off with a violent rhetoric suggesting Trump supporters be attacked by federal agencies in a bizarre rant.
I have a question. Are you also a lawyer?
Yeah.
I am. So you could conceivably be a great AG if this was... Because, and I say this because your moral core is magnificent.
Wow.
And I I know you probably don't want it, you don't want to think about it, but I just feel like I would feel a lot better with you leading the FBI, the CIA, the NBC, the LMNT, everybody. That's just me. So I'm just saying, should it be floated? Please think about it.
And under the radar,
we have to get Vice President Harris elected.
Yes.
Really, like,
well, you know, I'm being.
You're putting it out there in the universe.
I'm putting it in the universe because that's how we do things.
Former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is not surprised at the attacks on Trump and his supporters, saying the media has lost a lot of credibility over the years in relation to Donald Trump.
Well, I think so. They've lost a lot of credibility, Andrew, over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. They've never figured out a way to deal with Donald Trump, you know, going all the way back to the original Russia investigation in 2016, 2017. They've been wrong so many times about Donald Trump. And the most recent, I guess, would be some of the comments he makes out on the road that get taken out of context. And even today, we had one of the left-leaning networks having to apologize for misrepresenting something that Trump said. So, yeah, I think there is a credibility issue. It's bad for the country. I happen to think that a healthy and credible press is good for democracies. But right now, the press says a lot of the press has a credibility problem here.